I'm back on Careers in Discovery with Richard Law of Exscientia. Rich, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for the invite. It's great to be here.
Absolutely, great to see you. And I'm really looking forward to diving into your career, Rich, because there's been some really interesting transitions that you've taken throughout what has been I would expect a fascinating journey. But would love to start by talking a bit about Exscientia. A lot of people in drug discovery will know the company to some extent. But for those who don't, maybe if you could give us a quick overview of what you're up to there and where the business is at, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. So Exscientia is a clinical stage AI-driven drug discovery company. Um, we have now three of our own molecules in oncology in the clinic,
Okay.
and then there are five other molecules which are at clinical stage, but with our pharma partners,
Hmm.
either Nippon Sumitomo or BMS in the case of our PKC theta inhibitor, which just had a positive phase one readout.
Fantastic.
Um, when we say AI, we mean lots of different things. The core and the sort of founding of the company 12 years ago was in better uses of data modeling and deep learning in the actual small molecule drug design. So,
Hmm.
i.e., going from hit to a better development candidate. But actually, over the years, we've built out the platform so that it's more end to end and multifaceted in actually how we use different kinds of AI and different
Okay.
kinds of modeling at different stages, because it's sort of fundamental to the belief and the goals of the company that we want to encode as much as possible and automate as much as possible as many different parts of the value chain of drug
Right.
discovery. So, we've added in how we better use data, knowledge graphs, LLMs, uh, big screening around how we select targets to
Hmm.
work on, either for our own oncology pipeline or with our partners. Um, and we are using precision medicine approaches
Okay.
help us to understand how are our molecules, particularly in oncology, going to translate into patients in the clinic.
Hmm.
We believe that a big driver of probability of success is how you select patients,
Right.
um, and then using model informed drug discovery in how we design our clinical trials. So, in other words, the goal of the company is really to improve the probability of success of drug discovery.
Yeah, I see.
And we believe that in order to do that, we have to we have to be better at each one of those sort of four parts of the drug discovery and development process. And so we're going after all of them.
Yeah, I see. So starting from a very specific focus, it's then about, okay, we've got the sort of principles in place. How do we apply this more broadly to drug development?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I say, the founding of the company, when it was
Mm,
spun out from Dundee University 12 years ago, was around that molecular design piece. The founders, a couple of which had come from big pharma, were frustrated that big pharma was relatively slow
yeah,
in how they did drug discovery, but actually more that they seem to have masses of data that they didn't use enough in the design process,
hmm,
and felt like if they could use that data better, use more models, um, optimize those models over time through a process of learning, that you could end up with a better molecule at the end.
right.
And then they found that a side effect of doing that actually made the process go faster as well.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily a goal to go faster, um, but because of how the learning process works, you end up finding that there's an acceleration that
Yeah,
takes.
I see. And this might be a difficult question to answer specifically, and that's fine if it is. And I appreciate you still refining the approach. Do you have any sort of estimates or targets about how much more effective you can make, like how much you can increase the chances of success with these programs?
Oh,
Or
it's a great question.
yeah,
So there was some BCG data, uh, data. There was a BCG paper
okay,
published, um, roughly showing that you get quite a big increase in the probability of success in phase one.
hmm,
Um, so the industry average in phase one is something like 50%, whereas the BCG paper had it more at 80 to 90%, which
wow,
is a massive increase.
yes,
It's personally, I find that the publication is a little bit controversial in how they've selected the inputs.
okay,
Um, there's a lot of companies in there that, well, who knows exactly where the AI was applied, but like,
yeah,
it's hard to necessarily, break down this. AI did not suddenly occur at only one company. It
yeah,
didn't.
okay,
It's like been an evolution and over time to better and better use of data, different ways of modeling and whatever. So and using it in different stages. Is it target selection? Is it molecular design? Is it how you ran your GLP tox? Is it how you selected your patients? Like it could have been all of these things,
yes,
um, or not, or one of them.
yeah,
Um, but I think we think that maybe that measure is correct, and we sort of um, see that in, let's say, a subset of the data that we trust better in terms of the
mm,
input selection. So, and I think what that tells you is that by using more data to understand particularly DMPK properties, tox prediction, that you're likely to produce a better quality molecule, a molecule that you better understand, what else might this molecule do
yes,
in humans other than the thing that we specifically designed it to do.
yeah,
And so when we talk about, you know AI and deep learning and multi-parameter optimization and getting to better molecules, that's kind of what we end up looking at. We end up looking at these, what we call stoplight charts, where we take what the ideal parameters are for our molecule before, in terms of DMPK properties,
mm,
tox clearance, half-life, whatever. um, and the AIs are able to problem solve.
right,
And then you compare to other molecules that have maybe made it into the clinic for the same target, and you just see a better profile of molecule. And ultimately, that will mean that you're much less likely to fail in IND
yes,
enabling or in phase one.
yeah,
So that does play out. Now, phase two, the paper itself said there's better probability of success in phase two as well.
okay,
I would argue that data doesn't exist yet.
right, right, right,
I don't really believe that there's enough um, truly AI designed molecules, if any, in fact, that have made it through phase two yet.
okay,
And there, the problem is a second order problem. It's like, not only is your molecule high quality enough to dose high enough that it might work in humans, does it actually?
right, yes,
So
yeah,
have you selected the right biological target? That's one thing. Um, and have you selected the right patients, and all sorts
yeah.
of other factors which now come into determining efficacy, which is a whole other level of quality.
Yeah, and there's a I imagine there's going to be a lag, isn't there, in terms of actually just training the platforms to understand why do these things go wrong at that point, as it's been trained in IND enabling and phase one over several years. If there's only so many that have got to phase two, that these
At the
algorithms are
moment,
still learning,
I
right?
think it's just a timing
Yeah,
issue. It's just, the number. of molecules that have been designed by AI and how long it just
Yeah.
takes to get there. But actually, there is quite a few phase 2 readouts um, in the next 12 months from companies that have selected or designed molecules using AI. So
Yeah.
we are going to start to really get a data set around this in the near future.
Yeah, and if the molecules are of higher quality, you would expect that it then follows that there's a higher rate of success,
You would
right?
expect or
Yes.
certainly hope, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that's obviously the goal. And like I say, it's multi-layered.
Hmm.
And, to truly improve the probability of success, I think, you have to impact on all of the parts of the value chain. So you have to select the right target, you have to make
Yeah.
the right molecule, you have to select the right patients, you have to design your clinical trial correctly and be able to adapt that clinical trial to what's, to the data that's coming out. Um, and you know, who knows what the probability of success improvement will actually be.
Yes.
It would be massively transformational for the industry if we were to go from the current kind of like 95% failure rate to a 90% failure rate.
Absolutely.
And yet that's still a 90% failure rate. That's still terrible.
Yeah.
It's just that economically, that, like in terms of ROI for doing drug discovery and development, that kind of improvement would make a big difference, but it's still going to look bad
Mm.
in the statistical measure of what is the probability of success improvement that AI is actually enabling.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, as you say, it doubles the success rate, right? But but I
Exactly,
take your
it's
point.
double the success rate.
Yeah.
And and that would be a fantastic achievement. And I
Yeah.
just think at the moment we're at that sort of cusp that the proof is about to, or at least the next layer of proof is
Yes.
about to occur. I mean, it's interesting because we often talk about the Exscientia platform as being validated,
Hmm.
and like in some senses it is. The Exalt-1 clinical trial in precision medicine truly changed the life of cancer patients,
Yeah.
but they were not AI designed drugs. That was a clinical trial to select already approved drugs for the right patients.
Okay.
5 years ago or 6 years ago, nobody thought AI could design a drug like molecule, never
Hmm.
mind design a drug like molecule that got into clinical trials. And when we first did that with the molecules which were out licensed to Dynepon Sumitomo, that was a validation of something that at that point nobody thought was possible.
Right.
So understandably and completely fairly, the bar is being raised all the time. And
Yes.
now the bar is at phase 2 clinical success.
No, and that's a good place to be, especially as you say, from where we were 5 or 6 years ago. And I find this whole area fascinating in that there's loads of amazing science out there, right? That is fascinating, and the what we can now do technically and theoretically will be transformational for the world and for the human race and all that kind of thing. I think the sort of flip side of that is that these more complex technologies are expensive, right? And then if you compound that with paying for failure at the rate we've been paying for failure, well, can you really do that with gene therapies, for example, that are you know multiple times more expensive than small molecule therapies, and then you're paying for the failure of them as well. And I think, like you say, if there's two sides to this problem we need to solve, isn't it? There's the technological challenge, and then there's the economic and ROI challenge that needs to be addressed. And it's not going to go from 95% failure to 50% failure in a short space of time, but these incremental impacts, these incremental shifts will have a big impact if you look at it in terms of the cost of, because someone said to me years ago, a lot of the challenge with, and this will be obvious to you, a lot of the challenge with drug pricing is that we're paying for failure. Um,
That's entirely it.
yeah,
So if you know when we talk about it costing about $3 billion to get a drug to approval, what we're actually talking about is the 1 out of 20 that succeeded and
Hmm.
having to pay for the other 19 as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. To your points, it is a multi-parameter and it's a multi-modality future of solutions to this. I think the only thing that is clear, and I think you can see that pharma and biotech, I mean, biotech is always about innovation.
Yeah.
And it's about, and many different biotechs have many different technological innovations. So, you know, we're all trying to improve bits of the process, and big pharma is hopefully buying more and more into improving the entire end-to-end process, as well as obviously buying into all these different modalities like gene therapy and cell therapy and
Yes.
others. It's the only thing that is clear is that you can't stay with the system that we had. There was, the ROI for drug discovery for any modality basically had gone to zero
Right.
years ago.
Yeah.
And although it is complicated to make the big changes that you need in terms of whether it's using AI to do small molecule drug discovery, or it's better understanding human disease, or it's getting cell therapy to be economically viable. Like all of these things, yes, are going to take investment, but without that investment, we just end up with a system which at some point goes below
Yes.
zero as an ROI. And then you have, and there are thousands of untreated diseases.
Yeah.
If you actually then break those down into better patient selection, it it could be in the dozens of thousands of diseases, really. And you're not going to be able to, at some point you stop being able to run clinical trials for these diseases because there is no ROI for a process unless we improve it.
Yeah. And then we end up in a situation where all innovation is government sponsored or charity backed, right? And that, as much as you would see some progress through that, it would be slow and it would be at a much smaller scale, right?
And there's a role for that too,
Yeah.
especially in in some areas, particularly like anti-infectives. But that's never going to be the
Hmm.
core of where innovation and improvement is going to come from.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Um, I could spend the whole interview on this, by the way, Rich. So this is fascinating, but we're here to talk about you primarily.
Oh, well, okay.
Yes. So your role at Exscientia is as Chief Business Officer. So tell us a little bit about, at the stage the company's at today, what that involves, where you're spending most of your time, what you focus on.
Yeah, so Accenture is a hybridized company in the
Hmm.
sense that we've always been, from founding, a company that's formed partnerships in order to broaden the pipeline and help the technology to become validated in a risk managed way.
Right.
So I came to the company 4 years ago as the chief business officer to kind of expand to the next level of that. And so in terms of helping the company to do the deals that actually we've done in the last 4 years. So we have big pharma partnerships with running now with Sanofi, with BMS, and with Merck Darmstadt, as well as a collaboration with the Gates Foundation that were all signed in the last few years. And that's my
Hmm.
role, really, is to be responsible for forming and helping to manage those partnerships with those pharma and biotech and um, facilities like the Gates Foundation. So I was actually previously at a company called Biotech,
Mm-hmm.
who was actually the first investor in Exscientia.
Right. Yes.
So Exscientia was founded 12 years ago, and for the first 5 years of the company's history, they were completely bootstrapped.
Mm-hmm.
Bootstrap, very California term.
Yeah.
It's like it's quite it's an interesting. It gives you this idea that somehow people are like walking around, knocking on doors, but like I think it was actually like that.
Yes.
So the founders were spun out from the university with no money, and so forming partnerships was vital to them. They had to
Yes.
get fee for service deals. Otherwise, not only was there no way to like power the laptops, which the code was on, there would be no way to ever prove that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's always been this fundamental interplay between the signing of partnerships and proof points from the platform. It's almost like they flipped backwards and forwards throughout the
Yes.
company history. And it wasn't until um, Evotech and then BMS and Novo saw what Exscientia were doing back in 2017 that the company was actually given investment to expand the platform, to get our own labs, and to sort of take the company to the next level.
Yeah.
And so I was involved in that Series A investment 7 years ago from Evotech, and
Yeah.
then
I
joined
see.
the company 4 years ago as the chief business officer.
Fantastic. So your focus is really on, where can the technology best be applied? Where are the best opportunities for creating shared value between groups, and how do you then do that in a way that, of course, generates enough revenue and enough income to power the rest of the business? And I guess you still are very aligned to the science, but very involved in the commercial side of the business as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
I think the point is that, now having done the fundraising that we did back in 2021, you know, we can be, an investor funded biotech company, but that leaves a lot of design capacity on the shelf
Right.
if we were only to do that, because there's lots of molecules and lots of value we can add in lots of therapeutic areas. And by forming partnerships with the likes of Sanofi and Merck, we're
Yeah.
able to generate more of that value, and therefore end up with not just a pipeline of our own molecules, but a pipeline of interest in molecules that the pharma companies will then drive the clinical trials for.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to comment that Accenture's learned a lot from those pharma companies over the years. This isn't a one-way thing. We're not pretending, we're like little arrogant Accenture. We're going to teach everybody how to do this. It works both ways. So we learn a lot from companies like Sanofi, and
Yeah.
that helps us to be better.
No, 100%. I was going to say that if your focus is on how do you improve these steps, how do you improve the effectiveness of these steps, I think sometimes there is a little bit of a, and I guess you could call it arrogance. I think most people would choose a different label, but there's a biotech perception that big pharma is outdated and they're too slow and all this kind of stuff, right? And this is a small versus big thing that happens in every industry. But these are really successful companies that know how to run clinical studies. They know how to get drugs to market. They've proven this over, in most cases, what, like 100 years?
Exactly. Yeah,
It's
yeah. No,
it's
exactly. These are really successful companies. They're
yeah.
successful for a reason. There are things that they are good at,
Yes.
which biotechs either can learn from, or in fact will never be able to
Hmm.
do as well as big pharma companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's to be honest, it's one of the things that we recommend to companies we work with, because you guys have been over this bridge now, but a lot of the struggles that we see biotech companies facing, I'm sure you've seen this yourself, is that they struggle to make the transition from a research business or a research project, should I say, to a medicines development company, and actually it's through those partnerships that you can really see the path to doing that, right? And you can really see how this all connects.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. That, you know, there's an argument that we're almost in Exscientia 3.0 now.
right.
The company has evolved several times, and a mixture of the proof points, the funding, and indeed the learnings from the big pharma partnerships have been a big part of that evolution and maturing of the company.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to talk as well, Rich, about sort of your journey to this point, and the things that have taken you to this role, and to where you are today. So we like to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
Tell us a bit about, for you, why science? At what point the sort of computational element started to come in? Because it was fairly early in your career, right? Yeah, why this career? What are the origins of that for you, do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a 11-year-old son, and it
Hmm.
you know, he's obviously very young and he's only just starting to do like proper science in
Yes.
school, and I remember what I was like, and it reminds me of the sort of thinking and what how I ended up thinking that I wanted to do science.
Yeah.
I mean, because to be honest, like when I was his age, when I was just becoming a teenager, I actually wasn't that interested in science.
Hmm.
I mean, other than the fact that I like watching Star Trek, I actually, you know, I mean, I was good in school, like in terms of maths and English and everything,
Yeah.
but actually, I liked art. I liked things like CDT, doing design, things like
Right.
that. And actually, I thought that's what I kind of wanted to do. Um, I went to high school in the US,
Hmm.
and you know, there's differences between the UK and the US school system.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting about the US school system is how they teach science, or at least they did in my high school in the US
Mm.
anyway. So they teach the subjects within science in order, like not
Okay.
all at once. So whereas in the UK we do, you know, like for GCSEs up to the age of 16, we do like 10 or so subjects. So we're
Mm.
trying to teach everything all at once to a basic level. The US actually teaches up to an A level in order. So in other words, biology, then chemistry, then physics.
Okay.
What ended up happening is that before going to the US, I wasn't really that interested in science. And then I was doing what was basically GCSE slash A level biology as like a 14, 15-year old.
Right.
And I suddenly loved it.
Okay.
And I remember um, reading books like The Selfish Gene at that time,
Yeah.
and just suddenly being fascinated by genetics, by biochemistry, by how can our bodies be controlled by these molecular mechanisms that we can't see.
Yes.
And immediately, like that, I wanted to be a scientist, and just, you know, focused on science in school. Wanted to do bio. I realized that what I wanted, what I liked, was called biochemistry. And
Hmm.
so I, you know, applied for biochemistry degrees. I got into Oxford. I went to Oxford to do my biochemistry degree. And one of my professors at Oxford, um, a guy called Mark Sansom, taught molecular biophysics, which sounds very complicated. But basically, it is sort of like, how do we measure some of these molecular interactions, and
Right.
how can we better use the physics of what's happening to understand the chemistry, to understand the biology, like, and that real link between the very, very basic science and what's happening at a human biology level. And
Mm.
I found it fascinating, and actually did like a summer project with him, and then I did my PhD with him, which
Right.
essentially turned into a degree in computational chemistry.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and and then I realized, then I understood, oh, I see. So we can use computers to help design drugs. Wow, that's amazing. And so
Yes.
so then I did a postdoc in computational chemistry and became a computational chemist. And so first jobs in California in government and biotech, being a computational chemist. And then back in 2008, I was hired by Biotech as the
Hmm.
global head of computational chemistry. So moved back from California, back to Oxford again, to lead a computational chemistry group.
Yeah, interesting. And so you'd started down this path, I guess, sort of early 2000s, late 90s, that kind of time. And obviously, sort of computational approaches to science were in a very different place than they are today. What have you seen? Because you've been involved in this then for the last 20 odd years. What have you seen as the big changes? What has been the trajectory of this from your point of view, do you think?
I think there's two or three big changes. Obviously, the scale of compute has
Right.
changed.
Yes.
So back when back when I was doing my PhD, there were calculations and uses of methods which we could never think to attempt because we just didn't have the computational power to do it.
Mm,
So things like free energy perturbation calculations, which is basically what I said, it's like trying to understand the basic physics of a biological process. You could barely do it at
right.
all. But now it's almost like a standard way of doing drug design, or at least it is in computational slash AI driven groups within drug discovery
Yes. Yeah.
companies. So and so now that scale of compute has expanded into how companies um, look to understand screening data, look to understand like what's happening across millions of molecules, millions of
Hmm.
cell lines, and trying to parse that data to see if there's signals in those massive data sets.
Right.
That is really something that's only been possible through a combination of big compute and automated experiment
Hmm.
in the last few years. So as a computational chemist, what I was always trying to do was use computational methods um, to help medicinal chemists
Right.
with their role.
Yes.
And their role was to design the molecules. I think what's happening is a kind of a flip almost of what that role is. So like an analogy actually with Chat GPT.
Yeah.
So like if you use Chat GPT, your job is is both to ask the right question and also to make sure that the answer that you're given is correct, or at
Hmm.
least that you like certain aspects of it, that it answers what you thought you were asking it.
Right.
It isn't your job to write that initial answer anymore
Yes.
when you do that. And this is this idea of now expert-led AI. You're giving up the concept that as a human you can do multi-parameter drug design across
Mm,
dozens of parameters. You can't.
mm.
But what you can do is intelligently ask the right question, and when it gives you the answer, look at what it's recommending
Yes.
to you and think, is does that answer the questions I asked? Has it said something that's obviously wrong? And be part of a filtering process. Again, that is a completely different level of use of computation
Yes.
than existed. So some of the models are still the same, some of the methods are still the same, but they're being done on such on a much bigger scale across so many more parameters that you have to flip the roles. The last thing that I think is really different about what we mean when we talk about AI is deep learning.
Right.
This is something that it's very difficult for humans to conceptualize. So this is the idea that you have models. A model is just a prediction tool. Okay.
Yes.
So it's the ability to say, if I do this, the answer will be this. And when you're doing drug design, you need to be able to do that across dozens, potentially thousands of different parameters simultaneously. At Exscientia, we believe that drug discovery is a learning process and not a screening process. And what we mean by that is that we don't believe that the answer to creating a high quality drug just exists in the data. It
Right.
doesn't.
Yes.
Because by definition, when you start a drug discovery project, it's never been done before. And so what that means is that many, if not all, the models that you have for trying to predict what you want to be able to do don't actually do that.
Yeah. Okay.
And until you've improved the quality of those models, until you've improved the predictivity of those models, there's actually no point trying to predict anything. Now, that is fundamentally different to how medchem used to be done, even with the help of computational chemistry.
Yes.
Because what traditional medchem, like I say, even with computational chemistry, was trying to do was to optimize from the start, from the point that you were at the beginning. What deep learning allows you to do is design molecules for which the specific aim is maximum information gain. In other words, the AI saying, I need you to make this molecule because I think this molecule is in a chemical space which is most missing in the data in my models.
I
And if you
see.
tell me what the data for all these models is for this molecule, that will help me the most in improving the predictivity of the models.
Yes.
And until you've done that, there is no point asking me like what the next best molecule is because I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's just that ability for it to sort of self-reference where the weaknesses in the data are,
In
and
a
to suggest that.
multi-parameter space,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
get some really cool things when you do that. You
Yeah.
get
Absolutely.
into different areas of chemical space and are able to solve problems that other people haven't solved. And we see that in our molecules, in our PKC theta molecule, which is the only selective PKC theta molecule that anybody's ever designed, despite the fact that the entire industry went after that target.
Yes.
Our LSD1, which is the only reversible and brain penetrant LSD1 molecule that was ever designed. And when we look at the design process at the beginning of that project, we can see how it wasn't even picking the molecules that were predicted to be the best in terms of potency or brain penetrance. It was intentionally selecting other molecules
Okay.
because it was like, I don't care about these molecules until you've told me what the data looks like for these ones.
Right. I see. Yeah. And then it compounds, right? Because each thing that it learns, it can then draw parallels and
Absolutely. So
yeah.
the learning process is really interesting.
Yeah.
And we often make this parallel with the child's 2020 questions game.
Right.
That at the beginning of that game, the probability of you successfully guessing the answer is enormous, and it would be crazy to just start guessing. But that's almost like the traditional process of drug design, though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, even a child after 20 questions can go down from the potential answer in the hundreds of thousands or millions to almost certainly knowing the answer.
Yes.
But almost all of the information gain comes right at the end. Like in terms of the probability of
Yeah.
successfully guessing the answer, it's almost all at the end. And so you see this asymptotic increase in in predictive power.
Yeah, I suppose, and the big advantage being that it's not going to forget the things that it's ruled out or learned, or there's not going to be. I guess there can be
Well, I think the
misinterpretation,
key is,
but
yeah, to try is exactly that's the revolution that
yeah,
we're trying to bring, is using the data,
mm-hmm.
is using it throughout the process. And then actually what's interesting, and we're going to start to talk more and more about automation as a huge part of how do you improve the drug discovery process. And that's because if drug discovery is this 2020 questions game, then the faster you can spin those design cycles,
Yes,
the more information you can get and the more data you'll be able to use to increase your predictive power. So
yeah,
this is where, previously the encode thing was, well, we'll do it better, and as a side effect we ended up going faster. Actually, there's a role for speed in itself in improving quality.
yeah, absolutely. I think the analogy with ChatGPT is really interesting because ChatGPT is a generalist, right? And so it's starting from a kind of base level of nuance, let's say. But I always think of it as like it's a bit like hiring a brand new person who is really bright and really eager and wants to do a really good job, but has very little experience and is quite naive actually. And that process of educating that person is very similar to sort of progressing through a chat with Chat GPT, right? And I guess this parallels in terms of what you're talking about in drug discovery, because you're almost maturing it's almost like raising the AI as you feed it more information and you give it more context and you give it more insight, and then it can pull in way more information and knowledge and all that kind of stuff than you ever could.
Well, of
um
course, literally speaking, when we build LLMs, for say target selection, we can obviously make them much more specific to
sure,
what
yeah,
what we need. Um, but you're right, in terms of producing a platform, we're bringing more and more physics into the platform,
mm,
doing calculations to help the generative AI to filter, much more synthesis aware Gen AI. One of the criticisms, again, like way back, like 5-6 years ago, was AI can never design a drug like molecule. And then there was this sort of bizarre flip that occurred at some point where the people that were criticizing from that perspective were looking at the patents coming out from AI and going, well, that looks like a drug-like molecule. I could have designed that. And I was like, well, that's the point. Like,
yes,
you didn't design it. But the fact is, we have a Gen AI system now that we've educated well enough that it can at least design molecules that are as good as the ones that humans can design. That in itself is a step.
mm,
But the fact that it can now do that across so many different parameters and therefore solve so many different problems, that even when the molecule might look like a human designable drug-like molecule, what it actually does is potentially much more
yes,
refined, and you got there quicker than a human could have got there.
yes, absolutely. Um, and again, this is another topic I could talk about all day, Rich. It's fascinating stuff. We haven't even really talked about your move into business development and how you got
Oh God,
there.
yeah. Okay. How did
But
yeah.
but we're coming up to time. But but I'd like to just ask you to sort of finish off with looking at your career, looking at your journey through sort of being in the US, being in different environments, being in computational chemistry, moving into BD, moving into leadership roles. There's lots of transitions there that you've been through, and I'm sure you've picked up quite a few valuable pieces of insight along the way. If you had to give a piece of career advice to your younger self, or to your son perhaps as he gets a bit older, or if there was one thing that you wish you'd known when you were starting out on this journey from a career perspective, what do you think that would be?
To keep an open mind,
Hmm.
and to keep that mind open to the people around you that know much more than you. I think when I have enjoyed my career the most and moved on and realized how big my learning has been, and it's funny because it's usually in hindsight,
Right.
it's because I've realized that I accidentally sort of had a mentor. I
Okay.
didn't necessarily call them that. I certainly didn't tell them that that's what they were, but I was in a situation where I was saying, I know I'm good at this thing, but I'm trying to do this other thing, and you're obviously better at it than I am. And I am gonna do my best to just watch you and
Mm,
learn from you. You know, one of the things about career transitions is that the thing that makes you successful in the future is not the thing that made you successful in the past.
right.
And so you almost have to make sure that you're letting go of a little bit of your belief in your knowledge, actually. Because if you believe the opposite of what I just said, if you believe that, for instance, that being a good computational chemist is going to make me a good manager of computational chemists, or a good manager of drug discovery projects, or a good business development person, well, then you're not going to learn what you
No.
actually need to learn, because
Yes.
you have misunderstood the problem.
Yeah, I see. So be aware of those transitions, meaning that you're starting not necessarily from scratch, but you're starting a new path, and then look for the people you can model, look for the people who are
And
doing
it's
that
never
well.
going to, it's almost never going to happen in that order, though. It,
Sure.
most organizations will not promote you to do something that you clearly have never illustrated that you're capable of doing. Like, the learning comes from that open-mindedness from the experts that are around you,
Mm,
and seeing that they have an ability, they have a knowledge that you don't have in an area that's interesting to you, and you start to
yes.
kind of leak into that area because it's interesting and because you're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really good advice. And Rich, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Thank you again so much for the invite, Tom.
Of course.